I'm just saying, it's kind of funny that Willem Dafoe has both played Jesus and a guy who made a movie about Jesus. Who else can say they did that?
Joaquin Phoenix.
Who did he play that made a movie about Jesus?
I keep a close watch on this heart of mine. I keep my eyes wide open all the time. I keep the ends out for the tie that binds. Because you're mine, I walk the line.
I didn't even know Johnny Cash was a director.
Not exactly.
Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John told about Jesus on that gospel road. How his pillow was a stone where he laid his head. How the hungry 5,000 on the hill were fed. How the people came and listened to him, everything he said, walking down that gospel road.
Welcome back to Faith on Film, where we read church library in search of the good stuff. I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Nathan.
Say, you like some Johnny Cash?
Yeah, he's fine. Not really my cup of tea, but I don't have anything against him.
How dare you? I'm just kidding, I really don't care. It's just funny because, you're more the music guy, I'm really not, and Johnny Cash is one of the rare musicians I would consider myself a fan of. But that's neither here nor there. For those of you living under a rock, he's the man in black.
This map shows the location of every registered alien on Earth at any given time, some of them under constant surveillance. Everyone on those screens is an alien.
Boy, wouldn't that have made for an interesting cameo. Focus. One of the quintessential rock stars, Johnny Cash was an especially busy guy in the 1970s. He had a TV show for a little while, he played at the White House, and for our purposes, he made a Jesus movie. This is also around the time where his man in black persona really started to take hold. Cash said that he wore black on behalf of the poor, the hungry, and those who were in prison. Also for Vietnam, but that's another story for another time.
Cash's spiritual journey has been talked about a lot. He wrote and sang multiple gospel songs and performed at several Billy Graham crusades. He also converted actor John Schneider, but that's another story for another time. He also produced a, for lack of a better word, audiobook of the New Testament. New King James Version, if anyone was wondering. And baby Christian Johnny Cash wanted to convey his newfound religiosity through his art. And given his propensity as a musician, a movie was the best route to take.
Interesting decision? Now, like I said earlier, he didn't really direct this movie. A man by the name of Robert Elfstrom is today's director. Say, Nathan, what do we know about Robert Elfstrom?
Well, he did several TV episodes.
Okay.
And some lots of documentaries. Including Johnny Cash, the man, his world, his music. I wonder how they knew each other.
Can't tell you. Gospel Road was filmed in Israel, which is neat, and was officially released in 1973. Now, this isn't really a traditional movie, or a traditional musical for that matter, but, you know what? We'll explain what we mean as we go through the Jesus movie checklist.
First up is that exposition. It's, of course, Johnny Cash singing a passage out of Isaiah. Although, I'm not sure he's really thought this through that well, not that he contradicts himself or anything, but his entire point in bringing this up seems to be, and Jesus fulfilled a prophecy, so he's pretty great, and not really anything any deeper than that. There's no reference to the Davidic dynasty, the Babylonian exile, the Roman Empire, or even the Garden of Eden. Pretty much nothing you would expect to understand the significance of the Messianic office in either Jewish or Christian thought.
At least it's one of the better songs. This launches us into our title song, Gospel Road, which is where we see John the Baptist. Eventually. We spend a good few minutes, it feels like, hearing about John the Baptist before we actually see him. I was half expecting it to turn out that he was only going to be mentioned off-screen.
Not that this movie would be a stranger to that.
As far as on-screen John the Baptists go, he is one. I can confirm this. He is in fact a John the Baptist.
So I guess it's time to talk about the disciples.
Yes!
Now is as good a time as any to mention that this movie has a really loose chronology. The baptism in the Jordan and Passion Week are in the right spots, but everything else is pretty much up for grabs. For instance, the temple incident happens early in the ministry like it does in the Gospel of John. But then it also happens in Passion Week like it does in the Synoptics, and Johnny Cash does inform us that he does this again.
Here, I was just kidding. I found it kind of funny.
What's that?
If you did a Jesus movie where you have the temple incident in John, which is earlier, and then you get to Holy Week, and the guys in the temple, oh, not again!
No, not again! Given this wonky chronology, Jesus winds up asking his disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" mere moments after recruiting them. Calm down, fella, they just signed up.
That's not the only oddity about Johnny Cash's narration. Around the triumphal entry, he mentions that Jesus' good friend Lazarus has fallen ill. Alright, fine. But he never really goes into the part where Jesus actually raises Lazarus from the dead. We just segue into the triumphal entry. So we just left him there? That's an... Okay then. You know, you're not required to mention Lazarus. 3 of the 4 Gospels do not mention Lazarus. But if you're going to mention Lazarus, you gotta raise the guy.
Let's move on to Caiaphas.
And Pilate.
And Herod. May as well just knock them out in one fell swoop, just like the movie does. Because rather than going through multiple scenes of multiple trials and questionings, the 3 just stand under 3 archways and stare blankly at Jesus. I have to ask, though, if you're going to save time by doing it this way, why even include Herod? They go to him and then immediately back to Pilate with no real change in status.
We really didn't have anything to say about the disciples, did we? That's probably because, like Pilate and Caiaphas, they really don't have any lines. Which leads us to Mary Magdalene. Oh, hey, another character!
We haven't had one of those!
Ooh.
Which is ironic now that I think about it, because several of the apostles have established characters in the Gospels, and Magdalene really doesn't. Contrary to what a lot of Jesus movies will tell you, she's not really a character in any episodes outside of the resurrection stories.
Mary Magdalene is played by June Carter Cash. Are we at all surprised?
Well, definitely not when Johnny starts speculating about what a beautiful woman she must have been. Look, sir, I'm glad you love your wife, but we're making a movie here. Cash also spends a lot of time talking about what he imagines Jesus doing rather than stuff that actually appears in the Gospels, which is fine. It's not a problem. I mean, you saw how much we loved Prince of Egypt, but it's kind of annoying when he has to keep reminding us, now this is just my pondering. The stuff like Jesus wandering in the foothills of Nazareth as a child to meditate on the scriptures, Jesus horse playing with his disciples, Jesus playing with some children by the beach, or pretty much this entire scene with Magdalene.
Magdalene approaches Jesus on the beach because it is commonly believed that Magdala was a coastal town. And he's randomly touching her face throughout the song, and she finds this absolutely charming.
Do women like it?
No.
Oh.
No. She sings about how he drove all the darkness out of her, but, again, we're kind of hearing about this for the first time. It would have been nice if this had been established somewhere. I assume he's referencing the several demons, but considering most people don't know that about Mary Magdalene, who knows?
June is also the only singing voice we hear besides Johnny's. I wonder if this was personal or something.
Magdalene hits the usual beats of being present for the crucifixion and, of course, the resurrection, and being told to proclaim to all the other disciples and to Peter that he is risen. That's all well and good, except for the fact that this movie kind of skipped over Peter's denial, so I'm not really sure why this particular Jesus is telling this particular Mary to single this particular Peter out.
Then, of course, there's Jesus, played by Robert Elfstrom. Why does that name sound familiar?
Now, like I said earlier, he didn't really direct this movie. A man by the name of Robert Elfstrom is today's director.
Oh, yeah! Well, who plays Child Jesus?
Robert Elfstrom.
Really? Man, de-aging technology in the 70s was incredible!
Junior.
Oh.
Robert Elfstrom's Jesus is particularly notorious for being a white Jesus, which, okay, I will grant you, most on-screen Jesus are played by white actors, but Elfstrom is really white. He's a surfer dude blonde. I gotta admit, I also find it really funny in movies and TV shows where adults have the exact same haircut that they did as kids.
He comes across fairly charming when he's interacting with other people, particularly children, but he spends so much of the screen time by himself.
Didn't the preacher to the choir just go over how Jesus did that a lot in the Gospels?
Okay, yes, but I mean, he is by himself even when he's supposed to be with other people. Just look at the triumphal entry.
Huh.
He is riding a donkey down an empty street, but we still hear the crowds clamoring for him. Huh. Guy was right. The rocks are singing.
The only other really noteworthy thing about this particular Jesus is during his crucifixion scene. While he's up there, the camera pulls back, revealing a modern city landscape, which, given that we've basically been looking at the deserts of Israel this entire time, it's a little jarring, but it's a nice change of scenery. I think the symbolism is supposed to be that Jesus' death was for all men throughout all time, and as a metaphor for that, it's pretty solid.
Then it's time to move on to the songs. I do have one question. I'm not sure what the central idea of the title song is. It might be Jesus as a wandering protagonist. It might be the road he takes toward the cross, or it might just be a metaphor for the gospel being a way of life rather than an abstract idea, but I'm not really sure, and the lyrics aren't much help.
I went into this movie thinking that all of the songs were going to be Johnny Cash originals. But then June Carter Cash started singing, and I felt myself thinking, I swear I have heard this one somewhere before. And then it hit me. I was listening to a cover of Follow Me by John Denver. Was John Denver involved in this movie? Okay then. Now I am pretty sure that he wrote that song for his wife.
Well, you see, John is a John, and Johnny is a John, so John can use a song that John wrote for John's wife and use it for John's wife. It's the Johnsative property. Most of these songs are okay. A couple are pretty good, and most are incredibly forgettable. But the only one I had any real beef with was the Blind Man's song, because they just keep singing about how he sees people walking around like trees. Get it! Move on!
You're still better than a lot of modern worship songs. In all seriousness, I really wanted to like this movie a lot better than I did. I wanted it to turn out that this was one of those hidden gems that we were going to uncover. And okay, I feel like this is one of those things that would have worked a lot better as an album than it does as a movie. The cinematography is nice, but you can see Elfstrom is a guy who's used to working on TV and documentaries, not necessarily cinema. As for the acting, what acting? Outside of June Carter Cash, I don't think anybody's really giving what I would call a performance. And I'm still not sure what the thought process was behind making this into a feature-length movie. An album that you listen to in the car or when you're sitting in the living room with your family? That would be great. A series of music videos that you maybe watch during Lent? Absolutely. But a movie? Not so much.
I think one of its biggest failings is it tries to say everything about Jesus. Most of the time you'll want to hone in on some particular facet of the man, like St. Matthew has him as a firebrand activist. Anything with Bruce Marciano tries to play him up as friendly and approachable. Godspell does the same thing but better. Il Messia plays him up as a working man. And Johnny Cash's interpretation pays lip service to all that. Like, he talks about how Jesus upsets people who want to do him in, but we don't really see any of that. We just see him playing with children. He talks about how Jesus does all these amazing things for people, but he spends so much of his time isolated from humanity that it doesn't really land. So, in trying to say everything about Jesus, they wind up saying nothing. Maybe that's to be expected. I mean, Johnny Cash was a pretty recent convert, so it's probably he didn't have that deep a knowledge of the subject at the time. But at least Cash was favorably disposed toward the movie even in his later years because he used clips of it in his Hurt music video. The song from the Logan trailers.
Right. I think that's the main thing I find disappointing about this movie. You can tell that Johnny Cash was passionate about this project. You can tell he really wanted to make it something unique and interesting. And it's especially frustrating, again, he's the man in black. And he wears black to symbolize the poor and the imprisoned and the hungry. But he doesn't really take advantage of Jesus' ministry to the poor, the hungry, and those who are in prison. It seems like a natural line to draw. Again, this is a really interesting concept, but it could have been so much better in the end, which normally gets you an A for effort, but in this case, I sadly have to go with meh.
Thank you for joining us for Faith on Film. I'm Nathan.
And I'm Stephanie. We'll see you next time.